Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucy Qian. I am the Chief Commercial Officer at Subtle Medical. I'd like to welcome you to another one of our Subtle Insights webinar series, where we talk about the latest trends and applications of deep learning in medical imaging. This morning, we are pleased to have Dr. Lawrence Tanenbaum talk about pushing scanners beyond some of the pilot studies with SubtleMR that were conducted at RadNet. Dr. Tanenbaum needs no introduction, but he is the Chief Technology Officer, Director of Advanced Imaging at RadNet, and also a semi-finalist in this year's Best Radiology Researcher list by AuntMini. SubtleMR is 510(k) cleared for image enhancement by noise reduction and increasing sharpness. Dr. Tanenbaum is a member of the Subtle Scientific Advisory Board, and this webinar represents Dr. Tanenbaum's personal views and experience in the field of diagnostic radiology. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tanenbaum.
I think I've passed the technical challenges here. I see Lucy smiling. Good morning to everyone. And we'll talk a bit about AI and image reconstruction over the next 45 minutes or so. So as an overview, this is really what we're going to cover. We're going to open up with a bit of a background in AI in the healthcare enterprise. Starting with what is AI. I've got to get all these pictures off my slide. And AI is basically a branch of computer science devoted to creating systems that do things that humans are usually required to do. It's a variety of fields and techniques. We're not going to get into the detail. We're just basically saying that AI is something that enables machines to do things that they couldn't beforehand. And by the way, this is actually the faculty of the next in-person meeting you'll ever go to. Again, as you can see, we're sending robots in advance. And frankly, fortunately, things are getting a little bit better. As a matter of fact, I'm going off to my first in-person educational meeting at the MR National Symposium in a couple of days in Las Vegas. Now, AI is pretty much everywhere in the healthcare enterprise. Back in 2018, about half of the healthcare organizations were already using, or at least planning to use, AI in their day-to-day practices. And if you look at this survey from Frost and Sullivan in 2019, you can actually see that between big data, essentially a machine learning application, and AI, machine and deep learning, you can see that this is a significant component of the technology that's impacting healthcare. In day-to-day life, AI is all around us. I can't open a website without getting advertisements for the meat that I order online. Whether it takes me, to the airport with Waze or in a car share with Uber, is AI everywhere in our lives. And at this point, we're pretty much aware that there have been some flamboyant successes, beating champions at Go. Although, frankly, those in the know that winning games is one of the easier things for AI to do. Autonomous driving is, more and more prevalent in society as we move on. And as you can see, in things like image recognition, computers are already better than humans. And on speech recognition, computers are actually exceeding human performance. And this is really a hallmark of what AI can do. There are areas when we can exceed human performance. On the other hand, these are not quite ready for prime time in day-to-day life. As you know, there have been a number of unfortunate accidents with drivers who trusted their self-driving system to a default or a fault. This happened just outside my window a couple of years ago when Sully had to overcome the autopilot to bring these people down safely in the Hudson River. So, despite the advances, and AI has been around for a long, long time, 35 years or so, but despite the recent advances, there are still lots and lots of challenges out there, particularly when it comes to reasoning and integrating context. They can do amazing things, but again, reasoning and context are still quite a bit off. As a matter of fact, this is a great example of where AI can get confused. When a human looks at this picture, we see there's something weird about it. I'm not sure we understand what's weird about it, but it's just weird. A computer really doesn't see that. We can sense intrinsically that the picture is upside down. As you can see, this is a rock sitting in the water, but the computer can't see this because it doesn't really understand context. This is another example, sort of a alternative to the Turing test. The computer can see that this is a bicycle, does very well with computer vision, but it doesn't understand why the sky is low and the bicycle is upside down. It can recognize the duck on the roof watching TV. It knows what ducks and TVs look like, but it doesn't understand why, watching on the roof is a little unusual, and why this, sheep has stripes, and why this cow that it recognizes is lounging with a pina colada. So, again, context is really the challenge here. And computer vision is doing really, really well. It's remarkable how well it can tell chocolate chip ice cream from a Dalmatian. On the other hand, there are still major blunders, occasionally calling a blueberry muffin a chihuahua. So again, still far from being the ultimate solution to every problem. As a matter of fact, whenever context really matters, human review, human involvement is still essential, whether it's at Facebook, Google, Twitter, at the financial institutions, and even in the censoring process in China, adding that context. And you can see, I love as you look at this example, these were posters all over Los Angeles, and where these weren't done by an AI, but they were done by someone without domain knowledge. And I think that's really one of the key pieces that humans bring to these equations, whether we're developing products in AI or using products in AI. I think the human would have known the brain was in there backwards. In this case, the person without domain knowledge made that error. So overall, I think you can tell at this point that hard problems like beating a champion at Go, or looking through reams and reams of information for patterns, are really easy for machine learning systems, for computers. The easy problems, recognizing your mom, walking across the room, lifting a pencil, answering a question, those are the ones that are hard for computers to do, and those are the challenges that are out there in front of us. Now, with that bit of a background to AI in society, let's talk briefly about the spectrum of AI use in radiology that's already happening today. These tools are being used to augment decision-making in appropriate use criteria. At RadNet, we've actually had a very successful trial looking at artificial intelligence to better attack the problem of patient no-shows and late cancellations. Segmentation is a really innate great strength of artificial intelligence programs, deep learning, machine learning. Lesion detection is actually relatively easy for these tools to pick up what's different from the background after studying a certain number of cases. And quantification is a great opportunity for AI. As a matter of fact, if you looked at segmentation and quantification, you can see one of the great causes for AI in day-to-day practice. One of the best use cases, and that is to take these tasks which don't really require advanced education and add to the drudgery of a day and automate them and bring them more to our fingertips so that we can use them more than we would in the past. And this can even go as far as reporting and tailoring reports to the actual audience, automating and maintaining the appropriate follow-ups are done. A lot of opportunity for AI in the healthcare enterprise, some of which is real at the present point in time. We are going to concentrate today on the use case in terms of dose reduction and scan time reduction and looking at the application and image reconstruction. So let's go to our first poll here, which I don't seem to be able to launch right now with where I am on the screen. Let me see if I can do it this way. Not the best idea. So here's our first poll. What can AI do for you? What would you like it to do for you? Is it improve throughput on your older scanners? Getting your scanner to outperform its class, whether it make an old scanner perform like a new one, a 1.5, work like a 2.2, boosting your overall image quality to make, the whole facility more competitive and more efficient, improve throughput on newer and older systems, not just the older systems, or just enhance the patient experience. So I've talked long enough. I'm going to end the poll. Actually, it looks like we're still adding quite a bit, so I'm going to wait until it settles down a bit. Gives you a sense of who's reading ahead and who's listening to me. All right, it looks like we've got over half the people have voted, and I'll go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like, interestingly, the #1 sees, number one response says that the registrants see a role for artificial intelligence improving throughput on both newer and older systems. And that's a bit of a surprise to me. Right after that, it's boosting overall image quality. The patient experience is not neglected. And I'm not sure there's a lot of boxing fans out there. Maybe that's why punching above the class has sort of fallen off. I believe I was supposed to do that beforehand. So now you can actually see the results that I've got there. And thanks everybody for joining in. We'll have that kind of fun throughout the rest of the presentation. And to see if I can get back to where I was. I gotta minimize that. Okay, let's see if I can get back. All right, so let's come to the second piece of the presentation, and that is an in-depth discussion of artificial intelligence and image reconstruction in radiology. And there are a number of introductory use cases that are out there quite a bit. We'll start out with compressed sensing. Essentially with compressed sensing, we're using machine learning type analysis to vastly undersample case space and markedly accelerating scan time, but using cleverness to keep the image quality where it needs to be and reduce artifacts. And you can see some examples from our clinical sites and how you can use compressed sensing to get a more isotropic acquisition without paying a penalty in terms of scan time, at least not a very high penalty in terms of scan time. I think we're all familiar with iterative reconstruction, which is on the same scale. It's had the greatest use in CT, but you should know that there are products out there for MR that can allow you to go a little bit faster. Just like in CT, we can use less dose. In MR, we can use less signal. And here you can see our routine protocol. This work was done with us. And here you can see the accelerated protocol, and we're able to basically emulate quality with about a 33% time reduction, which is nice. Now, you may be aware that deep learning versions of iterative reconstruction are now available from a number of different vendors. And this will help us go beyond what traditional iterative reconstruction in CT has done. As you know, with CT, with the doses we use today, you would not get a satisfactory image with the older techniques, which we refer to as filtered back projection. However, with iterative reconstruction techniques, you can take these very low doses and turn them into a highly acceptable experience, highly acceptable image. In this case, we're actually looking at the difference between the older version of iterative reconstruction. Oops, that wasn't a wise move. Okay, I'll get out of that. And the newer versions of iterative reconstruction. And you can see that the newer versions of iterative reconstruction based on deep learning actually give a better, more satisfactory appearance to the image than we've had with the traditional, essentially algorithm-driven, programmed algorithm-driven iterative reconstruction techniques we had before. Now, to put this into perspective, if you look at this upper right-hand corner, you can see a typical CT reconstruction, filtered back projection. The CT dose index for this study was 80, that's our baseline, and our noise level was 15. So in this case, the standard dose study did this phantom with a noise level of 15. If we go down to 10% of the dose, you see the image gets a little rough with a filtered back projection, and the noise level has gone up. And with CT, you measure noise by looking at the standard deviation of the noise of the signal of the image. Now, if we take this to using traditional iterative reconstruction, in this case, ACER at a level of 50, notice the dose is still only 10% of what we had before. We can reduce the noise to 20 from 15, from 32, not quite as low as the original one at 15, but we've done a nice job here, but it's still not, not quite as clean as the original version. Using deep learning reconstruction, you can see that the image looks very similar, the noise level is very similar, yet we're using only 10% of the dose. So this kind of really is a nice testimonial that we can get away with a lot less dose with these tools. Now, as opposed to the traditional versions of iterative reconstruction that are out there, the quantitative integrity of CT data is maintained with deep learning, where it is actually lost with the traditional iterative reconstruction techniques. Here you can see comparing filtered back projection at 120 kV and 70 kV on the left to 120 kV, 70 kV on the right, but using the deep learning reconstruction. Easy to see that the noise levels have dropped. That's easy. That will happen with both versions. But with deep learning, notice that the phantom appearance is exactly the same. Depending on how we've doped the phantom, the numbers, the Hounsfield units, the appearance is exactly the same. Here you can see another demonstration again, filtered back on the left, 2 different KVs, deep learning on the right, 2 different KVs. Notice the subtleties in the appearance of the phantom. The Hounsfield unit values are maintained with deep learning, so the quantitative integrity of the image is maintained. Now you'll notice compared to filtered back projection where the materials all track pretty much over each other, when we use iterative reconstruction with either ACER or the more modern version of model-based iterative reconstruction, you can see there's divergence. There's absence of convergence of the curves, which means the tissues, these materials will behave differently with iterative reconstruction, traditional techniques, even the model-based ones, compared to filtered back. You know, this manifests in some ways in an odd texture of the image, by the way. You see with ACER, there's an odd texture here that isn't here with deep learning. Now you say, well, which one of these is correct? Well, you can look at this scientifically and quantitatively with something called the noise power spectrum. And you'll notice when we look at the noise power spectrum, the filtered back projection, which is our gold standard, and the deep learning, which is our new gold standard, you can see overlap perfectly. When we apply the traditional iterative reconstruction, there's a major shift in the appearance of the noise power spectrum. And this is the texture that we see that some folks object to, that the newer techniques really don't deliver. Now, you know, yet some of that is a loss of spatial resolution. If I take this really to the extreme and I take this phantom and I really filter the heck out of it, you know, it's really very soft now. And I subtract this image from that image, you see all the structure that I've lost. Whereas if I just treat it with deep learning, you see I've dropped the noise, but I've lost no texture. You can't recognize any anatomy. And that is really the advance that deep learning brings, whether it's with MR or CT, is we're not throwing away our resolution. As a matter of fact, as you know, these tools can be applied at different levels. This is low, this is medium, this is high. But in all of these circumstances, notice the images look subjectively good and the phantoms haven't lost any resolution, which is really what we're after here. Now, we're going to spend most of our time today talking about MR's version of deep learning reconstruction. There are a number of FDA-approved tools. I showed you the FDA-approved CT tools. These are the FDA-approved MR tools. And as opposed to the ones that are built on complex data that are vendor-specific, generally leading to only the newest machines, techniques like SubtleMR, which are DICOM-based, technically can be applied to any machine and are vendor agnostic, which is kind of interesting. Now, what does deep learning give us in MR? It allows us to enhance our images by denoising the image or allowing you to compensate for your faster acquisitions and bring back the quality and or increase sharpness. And here you can see examples of work that we've done where we've essentially improved the image over what we did beforehand with our accelerated protocols. And we'll look at some of those. So let's get back to another poll. And here I'm going to ask you what you would do with deep learning based recon. If I can figure out how to do this. This is not the easiest thing for me to figure out. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to poll number 2. Okay, so what would you do with deep learning based reconstruction? Would you go for higher resolution? Would you divide the impact between 25% speed and more sharpness? Would you go with 50% speed, 50% sharpness, 75-25, or it's all about the speed? So we'll go ahead and let the votes come through. All right, so it looks like we're tapering off. At about a little more than half, I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to share the results. Before I do that, just in case I lose it, looked like it was 50-50 in terms of our interest here. It, you know, took the win. Surprisingly, and really aligned with my personal feelings, speed alone was not the primary driver, and that everybody, at least the folks that responded, really has a sense about how we can improve quality with this technique, which I think is really exciting. All right, I got to get this thing out of my way here. All right, so let's go on. So, you know, this is my perspective on AI and MR image recon. We have the opportunity to optimize scanning, by maintaining image quality with scans that are conducted with reduced time protocols, and you'll see the impact with us. You have the opportunity to enhance the patient experience. About 30% of patients who go into an MR scanner complain of significant frank anxiety reactions with loss of control and abandonment. And we found in our institution that, and in other surveys, that pretty much the #1 request of patients is to get out of the scanner faster. And either by moving quality forward or improving the patient experience, this gives you the potential to boost referrals, which is always a good thing. You can also take the approach of a virtual scanner upgrade. Okay, we can use these tools to significantly improve the quality of what our scanner puts out. This allows us to improve standardization and consistency across our fleet. It's not at all unusual at a RadNet site to have an old 3T next to a new 3T and struggle with which one we prefer. It's much more harmonious for operational and clinical purposes to have the product be more uniform, not by dumbing down the new machine, but by enhancing the older machine. You can make a 1.5T more competitive in the community after a 3T rolls in. And again, more importantly, you have the opportunity to boost your older system to match your newer systems. But a lot of folks, I think, are already sort of keying into the concept that we can use these tools to outperform the limits of our system. I may not have a 16-channel flexible extremity coil on my old magnet, but if I can make that 4-channel coil perform at the 8-channel level, I think I'm going to be able to accomplish all of my goals on a routine day-to-day basis in doing this kind of thing. So here you can see some examples of some trial work that we did at our institution. We took a relatively fast scan at one of our sites, one of our older sites. This is a 2D flare. We actually moved it to a scan that was very close to today's 5-minute brain protocols, but you notice we gave up some spatial resolution. Notice what deep learning is able to do. It's able to reverse the spatial resolution trade-off, yet still maintain the scan time. That's pretty exciting. That's at one of our New York sites. That's with 2D flare. I don't know which one of our sites this is from, but it is from one of our sites where, again, we took a 3D flare, little noisy, but kind of long, and we actually managed the noise and improved the speed and went to here. Okay, but you see, still, we gave up some of our spatial resolution, which can really have deleterious effects on reformat image quality. Notice how we use deep learning to restore that image quality, but still keep the faster scan time, which I think is entirely cool. Again, the same thing here. This would be about a 6-minute scan. We had to go to this one for just for productivity purposes, but again, the image isn't quite as good. Imagine that I can use deep learning to take this accelerated scan and brought on by clinical needs and turn that into a scan that's probably even better than our original gold standard. Now, again, we talked about the quantitative integrity of the CT deep learning reconstruction being one of its key features. I think it's important that we establish that there is no aberration in the quantitative integrity of our MR data. And this is a study that I have the pleasure of working on with Dr. Stephen Bash's daughter, Susie Bash, who is actually preparing a manuscript which shows really nice results in terms of the quantitative integrity of the data treated with deep learning. You can see that there really is no significant difference between the quantitative numbers we get when we use the standard of care scan than we actually use our accelerated scans processed with deep learning, which is really a very reassuring piece. As a matter of fact, it's incredibly reassuring if you believe in quantitative brain imaging, but you suffer from the long scan times that are required, that we'll be able to do this in a much more expedited fashion, which hopefully will lead to a greater utilization of quantitative techniques in day-to-day practice. Now, again, anytime you get involved with something like a product that helps with image reconstruction as an add-on to your scanner, you'd like to get a feel for what the ROI, what the return on investment analysis is like. And you can see some of the impact that we've been able to achieve, and I'll show you how we achieved it. But if we could simply move from a 20-minute slot to a 15-minute slot, you could basically add a patient an hour, potentially increase your throughput 33%. And these little boosts in throughput have been very, very helpful at our sites as we were recovering from the COVID downturn into definite pockets of post-COVID imaging surging. Going from a 30-minute slot to a 20-minute slot gives us 50% throughput, and again, one more patient per hour, which I think is potentially very, very useful. If you assume that deep learning tools, which are available in up to about 60 to 70% of our volume, not all of them are approved for all indications at this particular point in time, more on that in a minute, we were able to achieve an ROI on the cost of the software of almost 6x, assuming that the only additional cost is the deep learning recon, and we're using the same scanners, same operating hours. As a matter of fact, if we reduced overtime, the ROI might actually be even higher. But remember, there are ancillary benefits that are, somewhat hard to quantify in that way, in terms of increased capacity, being able to take on surges and do more cases per day, staying closer to schedule and reducing patient inconvenience and overtime, the overall boost in patient satisfaction, which is hard to measure directly due to shorter scans. Again, one of the top patient complaints, requests about the imaging process is how long it takes. And, the benefit in terms of getting faster scans, which in general reduce motion, and with less motion, there are fewer rescans. And with fewer rescans and less motion, we often find ourselves in having to recall fewer patients, which is really kind of important. Now, the last piece I want to talk about is extending your scanner life. And that is an interesting little financial ROI as well, the so-called virtual scanner upgrade. There's no scientific formula for when a scanner needs to be replaced, but we just kind of know it when we see it. It's kind of the operational Ant Mini. You have two choices in that circumstance. You can go ahead and do a forklift upgrade, which is tough these days with CapEx restrictions, especially with COVID and anticipated CMS changes in reimbursement. You have the construction costs and the downtime costs, as well as the interruption of service to a neighborhood. And then if you look at what it's going to cost you to operate that new scanner, it runs a pretty significant number. Not that we don't do upgrade scanners, but there are if we can avoid upgrading a scanner, delay upgrading a scanner, that can have a significant impact, because we can keep the lower monthly cost of a legacy system plus the service. We all know the new systems, at least for the first year, don't have a service cost, and we're really only paying the additional cost of the subscription to the DL Reconstruction, which I think can be easily balanced. So again, what is our goal? How do we use this at our place? Well, we're always optimizing and harmonizing protocols across our fleet, trying to get that circumstance where there's less differentiation and we're always performing as well and doing the same types of scans. We're always balancing scan time with the patient experience and image quality, as you've seen, and enhancing image quality with deep learning really could mitigate the impact of acceleration. So let's look at some of the pilots that we've done at our institutions across our network, which is, across from the West Coast to the East Coast. We look to assess the feasibility of DL-based recon tools under a radiologist's guidance. Again, it's really important to understand here that these aren't science experiments. These are images that are vetted as acceptable to go forward by a radiologist. So it's key that the radiologist is the driver here. And it's the individual radiologists in the region that are doing the driving, which I think is really important. And you'll hear from some of them before we're done. The typical target sites, by the way, are vendor agnostic, being image space based. So any vendor, are typically older units that are either close to capacity or are limited in some way, like a SAR limited 3T, where patient comfort is falling into play, and scanning delays are really limiting workflow. They may be a site that needs improved IQ for either clinical needs, maybe we need thinner slices, do a midfoot to assess the plantar plate, or for market purposes, to avoid being outperformed by competitive practices. And our intent was to indicate deep learning recon for routine use and monitor it over time to make sure that our expectations are being met. These are the sites that we did. We had them in New York City, New Jersey, and California. If you're familiar with these equipment names, you see these are older units, except for this one newer unit. We're actually looking at pushing the envelope in in quantitative imaging research in MS. And you can see more capacity, more capacity, more capacity. But this one is an old 3T with delays between scans. And we're going to try and use this tool. We are using this tool actually, engaged in getting shorter scans so we don't have as much SAR deposition and SAR delay. So the way it actually works is we go ahead and vet this with the region VP to make sure that that everybody's on board and the operational impact, limited though it is signed up on. We enlist the site manager, regional, and site chief techs. Everybody's on the same page, and then we enlist the radiologist champion to drive the process, typically starting with the medical director, but eventually getting to the lead physician for the discipline. This trial is for MSK and neuro, for the MSK and neuro folks. We do a stage planning and implementation, which is really important. We do 2 sequences at a time. So let's say we do a lumbar spine. There are 5 sequences. We do the first 2. We do a limited trial with operational impact of about 3 minutes per scan per patient. We achieve sign-off on those scans, and then we move on to the other 3. At this point, we're actually faster than we were before because we've already integrated the 2 faster scans from we did beforehand. Actually, to be fair, at stage 2, we're usually neutral in terms of time savings. But then when we finish first exam, moving on to the second type, say from lumbar to cervical, we're already operational impact positive because we've integrated and adopted the new faster scans. But fundamentally, step 3, gain approval, implement a standard of care, and incrementally move ahead to the rest of the exam or to the next exam type. So how does the image workflow work? Well, there's a couple of different models. Basically, the scanner will push the routine DICOM data to an edge computer. In some of our installations, the processing is accomplished on the edge. In other cases, there is a very facilitated migration of images to the Subtle cloud and then back to the actual PACS in less than 5 minutes. So really nothing that's limiting our actual workflow. The images show up on the PACS. Radiologist recognizes and uses these images for interpretation. And again, really nothing that stands in the way of day-to-day practice. As an example, here's what we did with our accelerated protocols. And you can see that this is a lot faster than we did beforehand. So how did we accomplish the image quality that we had before? Well, we can use these tools to take this type of quality. You can see it's got a little low SNR, little noise in the, it's just not an ideal image. Even though we've achieved our clinical goal of a 20-minute exam slot, we can actually use these tools to bring the quality back. Again, still maintaining that exam slot, but maintaining the quality we're expecting. You can see here a routine 5.5-minute thoracic spine, again, where the acceleration has been balanced by a tool that corrects the image quality. Again, here about a 5.5-minute cervical spine. Again, we couldn't do this. We didn't do this as well without the deep learning tool that helped restore our quality. Here you can see, a complex with and without brain. If you can see at this magnification, this developmental venous anomaly, nicely demonstrated. We do our flares post-contrast, so you can see it here as well. But again, all of these sequences, 3 post-contrast sequences, all the usual suspects in about 14 minutes of scan time, something that would work in a 20-minute slot. And here is sort of the granddaddy of the brain exams that can go on forever with coronal imaging, with 2 contrasts, as well as all the routine sequences. Yet with these tools, we're able to accelerate our images and get this type of quality by restoring the quality with deep learning. As a matter of fact, here's a quote from Susie Basher, who's the medical director at San Fernando Imaging. And you can see when we talk about the research studies, a lot of them were her first her projects herself. And she says, look, at RadNet, our patients are a top priority. The imaging experience should be quick and as comfortable as possible. Groundbreaking innovations like deep learning facilitate an ideal solution. The SubtleMR AI enhancement product we used in our pilot allowed us to maintain image quality with our optimized accelerated protocols. In fact, we typically achieve a boost in image sharpness and signal, increasing detail, as well as the visibility of subtle findings. That's what we're after. So here's one of our West Coast sites. I have it as West Coast site, not to delineate which particular site. You can see our case mix between spine, brain, and knee, versus where the Subtle software was approved to operate. We had roughly 70% of our exams. And you can see this particular West Coast site was using 20-minute, 30, 35, and 45-minute slots. When we went to the time reduction, because of operational needs, you can see the kind of reduction we accomplished, somewhere between 30, cervical spine without only about 17, but 30 to 40% in terms of our reduction. When you look at the exam slots, to get these exam slots down, you notice we're able to pull a significant amount of time out of these exams that were kind of lengthy beforehand. We're able to make a significant dent in the operational impact. As a matter of fact, our VP of operations for the West Coast zone made this statement: working with our radiologists, deep learning allowed us to accommodate scans without contrast, as opposed to up to 45 minutes, as you saw before, in 20 minutes, and with and without contrast in 25 minutes. And more importantly, actually stay on schedule, which we had trouble doing beforehand. Now, here's one of our East Coast pilots. This particular pilot was a bit affected by COVID during this trial. You're not seeing quite as much of our imaging falling into the typical, outpatient imaging realm. But even in this trial, we're still 60% applicable to what we can cover with the deep learning software from Subtle. You notice in the East Coast, we were already at 20 and 30-minute slots. Here you can see what the knees look like at 8 minutes and 40 seconds. With all the usual suspects, and you can see that even though we've achieved quite a bit of acceleration with our protocols, we're still able to maintain the image quality. And here again is another statement from one of our neuroradiologists. The emergence of artificial intelligence using deep learning and MR image reconstruction has allowed us to achieve outcomes that weren't possible before. By applying SubtleMR to our RadNet optimized imaging protocols, we can achieve an even higher level of efficiency and patient comfort, as well as optimized image quality. That theme keeps coming up over and over again. So, as we're coming to a close, it looks like we're doing great on time. I'd like to share a couple of the research trials we actually did and presented, at peer-reviewed academic meetings and are preparing for actual manuscripts at the present time. In this one particular trial, we actually looked at using a typical neural network-based deep learning, in this case, the Subtle software, to deal with 30% faster scans and improve the quality, SNR, and resolution. And here you see the typical dilemma. This was our typical clinical standard of care scan. It was long and frankly a little noisy. We tried to accelerate this, but we gave up spatial resolution. Notice how the deep learning network can actually take this scan and restore it to a quality that actually exceeds what we did at the longer scan time. Really impressive stuff, I think. Again, same dilemma. This is a clinical standard of care scan. This is what we accelerated to for a variety of purposes. Notice the SNR is very high. The contrast to noise is actually very high, but the spatial resolution is lacking. Notice what a deep learning network can do for this in terms of sharpening up the image, still maintaining the low contrast detectability, the contrast resolution. I think it's really exciting stuff. Now, if you're looking at these critically, understand these are the same scan. This is a comparison scan, so there'll always be a slight difference in patient positioning, whereas these are the same scan. So if you were going to challenge yourself, what does this potentially sinister deep learning network do? You compare these two and look carefully at the edge definition, at the contrast resolution, at the spatial resolution. Again, this is probably something I've seen now several times. Really exciting stuff. Very nice looking clinical standard of care scan. An overtly rough looking accelerated scan. You can see why these would not be satisfying on their own. And a really fairly spectacular looking version of this image created by the deep learning network. Now, the reason why I like this case so much, because if you look in the circle, you see sort of one of the ancillary benefits of making a final reconstruction from an image that comes from a larger voxel size. In general, as we start to push higher and higher in resolution, we tend to lose a little bit of our contrast to noise. As a matter of fact, when you look in this circle here, even though I tell you there's a couple of white matter lesions in this circle, you'd have a hard time finding it. Now, when we go to the lower resolution version with bigger voxels and higher SNR per voxel, notice that we do see two lesions here in the circle. Now, admittedly, these aren't exactly the same position, but it's a pretty good correspondence. It's very close. Now notice what happens when I apply deep learning to this. I maintain the high contrast resolution of the low res larger voxel scan, but I actually exceed the spatial resolution and edge definition of the old standard of care scan. So it's really kind of exciting stuff. And in this trial, we showed that deep learning was able to produce a boost in perceived quality, SNR, and image sharpness at the 30% reduction in scan time. To me, that's pretty exciting. Now, this particular trial, we aimed for the same resolution. We simply wanted to see if deep learning could take scans that were accelerated by about 30% and see if we can match that quality. So let's take a look at that. So the purpose of this trial, again, is I already covered that, so I don't have to say it again. In this particular trial, standard of care is on the left. What we accelerated to on the right, you can see the image quality is not bad here, but I think you could appreciate when you look at different vertebral bodies, a little salt and pepper in here that isn't as much present on the standard of care scan. That's the way noise manifests. You see these little dark and light spots, that's noise. Sometimes radiologists think of this texture as resolution, but we know that it's noise. Okay, you can even see in the cord, there's more noise in the cord. Now, if I simply use deep learning to restore the quality of the image on the right, we get a much cleaner image, much less of that salt and pepper, even less than the standard of care scan. Yet we've really nicely emulated the spatial resolution and value of the standard of care scan, which is exciting. Here again, same thing, standard of care on the left, 33% faster on the right. Certainly no major compromise in quality here, but could we get the quality of this to come close to the quality of that using deep learning? I think you can see it again here. A little more noise here. It's not a terrible example. I would have gone for greater acceleration in retrospect, but nevertheless, look at how well we've emulated the signal to noise level as well as the edge definition of the standard of care scan. Now, blind read by several neuroradiologists, the end result was no statistically significant difference between the process scans and the original standard of care scans, which pretty much show we did what we needed to do. We coped with a 30% acceleration and maintained image quality, which again is what our physician testimonial said, which is what the example showed, and now what the blinded trial showed. So we have just a couple of slides left. I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of the questions again to see whether any of the things I've said and presented have swayed your thinking on this process. So you've seen this question before. I won't read it, but if we can go ahead and start polling. I don't see anybody voting. Yeah, there we go. See if any of the things I've shown you will change your votes. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to tell you the difference right now, but I think we'll certainly learn the difference. Well, it looks like a lot more interest in reducing noise. Okay, I think we're a little more trickling in. I think we're just about, well, we're still getting some more people voting. Okay, so in terms of what DL Recon can do for us, everybody's right on board with reducing noise. We didn't show any examples of motion, but we think we understand that. And this group says thinner slices, higher matrices, smaller field of view to a smaller extent. Okay, I think if I have to do this, I have to relaunch polling. I'm not sure I want to do that. I just want to do the next share. Here we go. Can I go on to the next one myself? I think I can do this. Okay. And again, I think this is the question I've asked before, so let's do this again. What can AI do for you? I'll let you read the question so rather than have it reading to you and you can answer instead. And if I didn't change anybody's answer, then we really could have taken the morning off. right, I think we've hit a pause point. And there you can see the results. So it looks like, I think this is the #1 answer before, improving throughput on all scanners, not just the old ones. I think we have convinced some that we're going to boost overall quality, and there's still certainly an ample investment in the patient experience. So I think I've got 1 or 2 more slides to go before I say goodbye. Let's see what I've got here. We did those, so I don't. So I think right now we've got a few minutes left, roughly 15 minutes left, to do take any questions and do some interactivity. So I think if the home office here can take over the presentation, and I'm going to stop my share, and then I'll say hello.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. We did have some questions come in. If anyone else have questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. So feel free to continue to submit additional questions that you might have. So one of the first questions we got is, does Subtle work on also 1.2T scanners as well as open magnets, or is this just limited to 1.5 and 3Ts?
Well, it's interesting. Being DICOM based or image space based, it can work on any image. And frankly, when you think about the unique need on whether today's open scanners, we have about 50 1.2 Tesla open magnets in the market, as well as some of the older generation open magnets at 0.2 and 0.3 Tesla. There is an increased need for these tools on those scanners. You can look at the 1.2 Tesla open magnets and say they do really wonderful work, but can you recognize the difference between a 1.2 and a 3T, or 1.2 and a loaded, well-run 1.5? I think you can. So you can bridge that gap and still maintain the open size, as well as try to squeeze a couple more days of life out of the real open scanners. So yes, you can do that.
Great. The next, there's a couple questions around the same theme. Have you done studies on small/subtle lesions or microbleeds? And if so, did you count the lesions, or were the lesion counts the same?
Okay, so we've done a certain amount of studies, not necessarily for microbleeds. We have done some work in multiple sclerosis and shown that the quantitative measures are holding up really nicely in terms of dementia, the quantitative measures for, in terms of MS, in terms of lesions. When we did the blinded reads in these studies, we challenged ourselves, were there any things created by the potentially sinister deep learning algorithm? And we didn't see any of that. Were there any things that we felt were lost by the deep learning algorithm, including lesions? And we didn't feel that that was the case either. So I think that is really reassuring that we weren't creating any monsters and we weren't losing any lesions. Now, mind you, when you work in image space, there's much less risk of this than when you do sort of a theoretical experiment with compressed sensing, scanning for 1/100th of the scan time, or trying to create an image from virtually no data. This is actually fairly modest leap that deep learning is performing here, and therefore we're well within the safety margin, and clinical performance really supports that as well.
Great. The next question is more about the transfer speed and the impact on workflow. Did this impact or detract in any way from the workflow since it's post-processing?
I think, if you are in a situation where you are reading the scans as they're coming off the machine, this is where you could have a difficulty theoretically if the workflow wasn't great, and the workflow is pretty spectacular. I mean, honestly, it's there before you really can open the case in a busy practice. And in a practice where you're half a day behind or a day behind, I mean, it's not even measurable. But even if you're reading the cases pretty much as they're done, the workflow is not at all interrupted.
Great. Another question is, can you talk about the third-party DL versus the vendor ones that are working on the case-based domain, and how do you consider the advantage and disadvantage of each?
Well, first of all, I have a fair amount of experience with both, and I have to tell you, I'm honestly very impressed with both. I think that deep learning is absolutely going to revolutionize the MR experience. And the way we use MR scanners, there's no question about it. I would say that the advantage of an image-based technique of the DICOM-based technique is it's vendor agnostic. So you can have one solution you adopt for your entire network across the scanners. And it's also available on all vintages of machine, old machines and new machines. Whereas in general, when you're working in K-space, you are going to be vendor specific. And judging by the way that these tools get rolled out, the likelihood is really high that they will be confined forever to only the newest machines, because again, it's very specific to the actual algorithm and reconstruction of the scanner. So a DICOM-based technique applies to anything in your fleet, new and old, whereas it's distinctly possible that newer machines will be acquired with the deep learning reconstruction from the manufacturer on board. So, but the older machines won't get neglected.
Great. Someone asked, can you elaborate a bit on the timeline in terms of how you made the decision, what type of exams you wanted to improve, and then, how long did it take for you to reach a clinically usable exam in terms of that decision-making process and the main factors?
Well, it's an interesting set of questions. It was my challenge to make this meaningful and make it real, right? I didn't want to go into a site, do an experiment, say, look, it works, and have no sign off from anybody in radiology. And it would be a fake win. So it was very, very important to bring this capability to my regions and introduce the manufacturer to the champions, and then get out of the process and just let the process work. And remarkably, the physicians bought into the concept. They worked methodically and incrementally through the implementation and adopted one exam after another. And I found it relatively quickly. We led on modest goals. We did, let's take a week for the first 2 sequences, see enough cases, make a decision, sign off, move on. Second set of sequences, full exam now integrated, look at it for a while to make sure that you don't have any gotchas, and then move on to the next exam. And this was done over the course of less than a month per exam in terms of getting this stuff done, based on the timeline. There were a couple of circumstances where, some tweaks needed to be made, and they were made. And frankly, I am actually extraordinarily thrilled with how well our teams engaged, how enthusiastic they are about the impact. For radiologists, most of the impact is, okay, business as usual, except for the areas where we do some enhancement. So what we're really saying here is they're investing in the patient experience, okay? Being really excited about the fact that patients are getting off the table 30 to 40% faster, and maybe getting a little better quality along the way, but certainly not sacrificing any.
Great. A couple of questions around similar themes. What is this FDA cleared for? What are the FDA cleared specialties? And then are there any other applications, for example, prostate? Are there pulse sequences that are either approved or not approved or not recommended?
Okay, so as you know, the FDA approval process is complicated, and the company that we've done this pilots with SubtleMR, has approached the FDA incrementally. So it started with neuroimaging and made that available. Our trials went on, during the transition to MSK imaging, starting with the knee. Inherently, it is available it will be available or could be available for everything, assuming that they get to the FDA approval process. There's nothing in imaging where the image-based techniques are limited. Having experience with the case-based techniques, I can tell you again that inherently they are applicable to everything. I don't know the Canon solution as much. I know the GE solution. The GE solution is currently limited to 2D techniques. You saw subtle work on 2D and 3D techniques. On the other hand, it's not limited in terms of the prostate, and I've seen the impact on prostate. It is astonishing, okay? We're talking about better contrast resolution, better signal to noise, better spatial resolution, just like you've seen with the deep learning images that I've shown you today. So inherently, these tools will be available. My prediction, I don't work for the FDA and I'm not part of the regulatory process, it will be available, head to toe.
So, I just want to chime in here, Dr. Tanenbaum. This is Ajit Shankar.
Okay.
Yeah, we are in the process of submission for the additional body parts, including prostate, as you said, and I think we hope to get the clearance by the end of the year.
And answering that is Dr. Ajit, I won't say his last name, who is
that's Ajit Shankar.
Yes.
He's the head of product here and chief operating officer at Subtle Medical. Great. Well, a couple more questions. I know we're at the top of the hour almost. Can you share a bit more of your experience with knee MRI?
Yeah, I think the knee MRI is very similar to what you've seen with the other images. I think there's no question we get all of the benefits I've talked about, but I can tell you that things look clearer. I think you see the extent better. I've seen annular fissures in the spine. They look a little bit better defined and a little larger. It's the same thing in MSK. You'll see things just a little clearer because we remove the noise. Now, Lucy, I saw something fly by as a question that you may not get to answer. I thought I could answer it very quickly. Have we applied the 3D FLAIR and 3D MP RAGE? Yes, we have. The quantitative imaging you saw example was with 3D MP RAGE and 3D SPGR, and the 3D FLAIR study was the FLAIR study I showed you with the sagittal images was 3D FLAIR.
Great. Oh yeah.
We have time for one. We got 3 minutes left. You got time for a couple more.
Okay. Is there a minimum required scan time below which deep learning have less effect or no effect on image reconstruction?
Probably. I'll let you know when we get there. The fear is, and you can read about this in the AI sphere. And as a matter of fact, when you try to get a paper published in AI, this is the kind of feedback you get, because it is known in data science circles that if you try to make an image out of nothing, you can get into some interesting areas where you can create things. But, so I imagine there are limits, but I don't think the limits are in the area that we can create with today's MR techniques. You don't have a license to create an image from one view. You can do the typical accelerations, reduce the necks, raise the bandwidth, reduce the matrix. You're not going to be able to do anything doing that. That's going to get you into excitement or even get you near the hairy limits. And it's the same thing with the onboard deep learning reconstruction techniques. It's possible that the future will hold greater and greater accelerations. I remember speaking at the ISMRM and sitting at a panel and showing the early days of compressed sensing, where they basically were imagining they were using data and making images out of them, and hearing the admonitions from the faculty that day saying, look, there are limits here. I know we've made the impression that there are no limits, but please don't go this far, because they know you can get into trouble. But I don't think we can get there at this point, anywhere near there, to where this is a real concern. But again, it's out there.
Great. You mentioned compressed sense in the beginning of this presentation. Would you use subtle and deep learning on top of compressed sense instead of compressed sense? How would you think about that?
Yeah, I would use, and I have used, deep learning reconstruction, the SubtleMR product, and the other manufactured products atop every acceleration, whether it's half necks, fractional field of view, reduced necks, compressed sensing, and the like. As a matter of fact, I've seen examples where you push the compressed sensing so far beyond its capabilities that the images break down and the image reconstruction tool brings the quality back to normal. So again, when you start taking the normal techniques, the routine techniques, you can only go so far. You can get crazy with compressed sensing to the extent that you can get the image to really corrupt, and you can use these tools to bring it back. I think it's really exciting stuff.
Great. Well, it looks like we're at 9 o'clock, so just to respect everyone's time, we will end the webinar now. We just want to say thank you very much again to Dr. Tanenbaum for his presentation and for everyone for attending. There was a question on if this would be recorded and the recording would be sent out. It will be if you're a registered attendee, so that should come in the next week or so. So thank you again, Dr. Tanenbaum, and thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.